Welcome to TSG Live Model Railroading, a program to share ideas and ask fellow modelers about their approach to the hobby. Sit back, relax, and prepare to be inspired.
All right. So you heard what the man said. Sit back, relax, and prepare to be inspired. Hi, I'm John. Welcome to TSG Live Model Railroading. This is October 30th, and it's about 9 a.m. on the West Coast, where I'm coming to you live. And our guest is also going to be coming to you live from the West Coast. Why don't we bring him on? This is Paul Deis. Hello, Paul. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Good morning, everybody.
Thanks for joining us here today. We're going to talk about tuning up rolling stock today. But before we get to that, I want to talk to you a little bit, Paul, and that way the people will get an introduction and understand who you are and what you're about and why they might want to listen to what you have to say about tuning up rolling stock. So I know that you've been a model railroader for a long time, and maybe just talk a little bit about that. And I've noticed you have a layout in the background. You could talk a little bit about that. And before I turn you loose talking about all that stuff, I do want to mention to people that one of the really cool things about this program today is that we're going to present Paul's clinic that he gave at the NMRA National Convention that we did virtually this past July. So if you missed it at the convention, or if you missed the convention altogether, you're going to have a chance to see at least one of the clinics that was put on during that convention. So anyway, Paul, so talk a little bit about yourself and let people know what you're about.
Sure. Thanks, John. Well, as you said, my name's Paul Deis. My beginning of model railroading is my earliest memory as a child. I was, I guess 3 or 4 years old. And the bedroom I shared in the basement with my two brothers was also shared by my dad's Lionel. So earliest things I can remember is those trains in my bedroom and how cool that was. And then when I was in my first real job, I bought my little nephew a N-scale train set for Christmas, and I set it up on the dining room table to make sure it would work, and he never got it. That was my first set of trains. So I've modeled since then. That was back in, I think, 72 or 73, so 50 some odd years ago. I started building layouts. My first layouts were N-scale, and then I inherited my dad's Lionel when he passed, so I had both Lionel and N-scale for a while. When I moved to California in the 80s, I met a bunch of people that were doing this HO, and nobody was doing N out here at that time that I could find. So I sold off my N-scale and went to HO. Been modeling in HO for a really long time. I also had a garden railroad that was actually 120 scale, so not just the old LGB stuff. I ran that for quite a while, and we did operations in the garden railroad. Mm-hmm. But where I live, it gets really hot and really cold, so the garden railroad didn't work out so well. So I tore that out, sold all the stuff, and with that stuff, I bought the materials to scratch build some 7.5-inch gauge railroad stuff that I take to a friend's railroad about an hour away. So I scratch built a locomotive and some rolling stock. The railroad behind me, my HO model of the Southern Pacific Railroad, it's the coastline from San Luis Obispo to San Miguel as it was in 1949. It's all hand-laid track, individually made ties. I'm a little bit crazy with that. Not to tell people anything better or worse about hand-laid track. It's just I enjoyed doing it. And actually was disappointed after about 3 years, the track was all in and it was done. So it's a decent sized layout. There's about 300 foot of main line, another 200 or 300 feet of sidings and yard tracks. And we do operating sessions. We were doing them monthly till COVID hit. So I can keep 6 people entertained for about 4 hours moving freight over the railroad.
Very cool.
The railroad is about 60% scenic complete. Before COVID, it was about 1% scenic. So for the last 2 years, pretty much I'm retired. So all I had to do every day was spend hours a day building structures, building rolling stock, and building scenery.
Right.
Actually worked a lot on my model railroader at that time, and master model railroader, and got a lot of stuff done in the last 2
Oh,
years.
right. Yeah, we've had conversation about that MMR process. I was wondering how far along. Last I heard, you had a couple that you're still waiting on getting evaluated or something, but you're only one away once that's done, right?
Yeah, well, if everything I did passes muster at high enough points, which is always up to the judge that looks, um, I'll be one piece of rolling stock away. But I still have a whole bunch of certificates that need to be evaluated. So again, because of COVID, so there's 4 of the 7 that are sitting done, either scenery, wiring, electrical, and rolling stock that all need to be evaluated. I've completed dispatcher, volunteer, and author are both off at the region being signed off on. So if everything passes, which I think it will, but if everything passes, I'll be one piece of passenger rolling stock away
Oh,
from
and that one
master model
shouldn't.
railroader.
Yeah, that one shouldn't be too hard for someone that's been modeling as long as you have.
Yeah, I've got the project planned. It's going to be a business car that's appropriate to my era, and I'm going to possibly scratch build it or possibly use the shell from something else to start with. But
Right.
yeah, that's the next project.
Cool. Okay. Well, I mean, I think that probably is enough to be sufficient to let people understand where you're coming from. I do have a question though that may be a little bit off on a tangent, but I'm very concerned about your nephew, the one that didn't get the train set. You did give him something else, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
But
I just
unfortunately,
wanted,
he's not a model railroader, so I screwed up.
right. I just wanted to make sure because I was very concerned that maybe he didn't get anything for his birthday that year.
Yeah.
Uncle Paul took the present and then was so engrossed with the present he forgot to give the nephew a gift.
I still do have the locomotive from that set. I kept that for a memento.
Right. Also it's interesting that back when you were doing N scale, it had 2 speeds, right? Full speed and stop.
Yep. There
Yeah.
were just basically Arnold Rapido, Aurora, postage stamp, and Atlas. That was the 3 brands that I remember that existed.
Yeah. Wasn't
And yeah,
River
they
Aussie back then?
huh?
Wasn't River Aussie around back then too?
I don't think I had any River Rossi. If they existed, I didn't have any.
Yeah.
I'm sure they were there as a company. I just don't know if they made N scale back then.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get off on another topic by accident if we keep talking about scales. So why don't we go to the presentation? And for everybody watching, feel free to post comments. And if you want questions or whatever, feel free to type them up in our text chat on the side there. We're not going to be answering questions necessarily during the time that the presentation is playing. This is actually a recorded presentation, by the way. But what we will do is once the presentation is over, we're going to come back on live like this, and Paul can answer whatever questions you have. And I think what we'll do is during the presentation, if a good question pops up on the screen there, one of us or both of us will write it down so that it gets answered. But it would be easier and better probably just to hold off, write down your own question, and then ask it afterwards when we're doing the questions and answers. And we'll probably talk for, as long as an hour or 20 minutes, something like that, as long as we still have questions coming in. Does that sound okay to you, Paul?
Sounds great.
All right. Then without any further ado, we'll get to the feature presentation right now.
Hello, everybody. My name's Paul Deis. and I'm a railroad modeler like the rest of you. I've been modeling in different scales ever since I was a wee child. My earliest childhood memory is my dad's Lionel, which was in the basement bedroom I shared with my brothers. He only set it up at Christmas time, which was usually he set it up in August and maybe took it down in July and then set it right back up again. So I've been modeling in a variety of scales since the early 60s. Did 027, N scale, HO 1 to 20. I also now currently model in HO and 7.5 inch gauge. And I volunteer at a 2-foot gauge actual railroad. What I want to do today is help you avoid pulling your hair out. As you can see, I've pulled mine out over the years. And help you avoid that by figuring out things we can do to your rolling stock to make them operate more reliably. So we're going to go through what I have found that works for me, and it's one way of doing things. It may not be the absolute perfect, or it may not be the way you choose to do it, but it's what worked for me. So here we go. So when we tune up our rolling stock, I like to look at different components: the couplers, the trucks, the wheels, the weight of the car, and also give you some ideas on the tools that I have found over my time that I've collected that work well for me. But how do we know what to work on? Well, what I did is I reached out to a lot of people that hold operating sessions and said, other than a knucklehead running backwards through a switch, what do you find to be the most common cause of problems that you have to go solve on your railroad during an operating session? One of the reasons I wanted to do that is your operators do not blush at telling you what's wrong. If there's something wrong, they'll tell you. And I ask my operators to do that. I give them little pink tags to put around the railroad. I tell them to bad order a card and fill out a little piece of paper to tell me what's gone wrong so I can fix it before the next session. Well, I was kind of surprised when I got the results, and that's what's on the screen. Most of the problems people have during operating sessions are due to couplers, misaligned couplers, uncoupling of dissimilar couplers, a variety of other one-off coupler problems. Then there were some problems with the way the car rolls, problems with the trucks, dirty wheels, wheel gauge, wheels not free rolling. And the one that caused the least problem, which I was real happy to see, is car weight. And we'll talk about why I am not too worried about car weight on how I operate my railroad. One thing to think about is this hobby's been around for a long time. Things have changed over time. We used to have X2F couplers, and before that, we had a variety of every brand had its own coupler. And the X2F was the first chance that we took to try to standardize. Sure, they worked for everybody, but they really didn't work well for coupling or uncoupling. They didn't look realistic. Then along came Katie. Katie came out with their knuckle coupler, which has changed over the years. And in my opinion, they're the gold standard on couplers. And there are other companies now that make a Katie compatible couplers. They've been around for a while, and there's some problems with those. Some of the problems we'll look at is plastic develops a memory if it's held under stress. Plastic isn't as strong. Another thing we'll look at is a Katie came out with over time, and they keep updating a conversion list. Modern, if you buy a new kit today or a new piece of rolling stock today, a standard Katie number 5 or one of their whisker couplers will drop right in. But if you've got a steam engine and you need to change out a pilot coupler, or you got some old rolling stock, the standard number 5 coupler isn't right. Well, Katie on their website publishes a list. If you got this car, use this coupler. Another thing I want to look at is the standard head coupler versus the scale head. The scale head is smaller. It's more realistic in size compared to the car. And you can couple the standard head and the scale head couplers together. They work fine, they don't uncouple. But when you're in an operating session, they tend to cause a little bit more difficulty in doing uncoupling. So let's look at those couplers. So this is a Katie ad that they put out. They did some testing. They hung weight from the couplers to see how they held up under some weight. So they took their plastic coupler and hung more than 12 pounds for 24 hours from it with no change in the coupler. They're 58s, which is the smaller head coupler. Same thing, no problem. They used some of the plastic knockoff couplers, and they deformed almost immediately. People go, well, I'm not going to be hanging 3 pounds from my couplers. Well, take a train that you normally run and put it on your steepest grade and pull it with your fingers. You'll be surprised how much weight you're actually pulling. Another problem that Katie didn't talk about here happened on a club layout that I was visiting. They had left a train parked overnight on a downhill grade. And when they went to move that train the next day, when it hit the flats, it uncoupled. They recoupled it, uncoupled in a different spot. And what they found is when the train was compressed, some of the couplers that had plastic whisker springs, that whisker spring got a memory and the coupler stayed deflected to the side. So once you got some slack in the train, the coupler flipped to the side and the train uncoupled. So what I have done is I have standardized on KD couplers. I most often use the number 5 or the new number 58s, which is like the number 5, but with the whisker couplers. And if I have anything with a plastic coupler, I toss it. One of the reasons that you might need a plastic coupler, if you have old locomotives, old Athearn locomotives are a good example. You can't have metal couplers on 2 locomotives that are backwards to each other on the railroad unless you've isolated the electrical system from the frame. Otherwise, you'll see sparks. So that's a time when you would want a plastic coupler. But KD's plastic couplers tend to hold up well. So that's why I use KD. Here's an example. This is my coupler storage box. It's got a variety of oddball KD couplers. Every once in a while, I'll find that I have to figure out what'll work for a particular old piece of rolling stock or a scratch-built car I made, or more commonly for the pilot on a steam locomotive. I can't tell you how many years I've had this box. There's even up in the upper left corner some KD number 4s. If you've never seen one, you ought to just go look at it just to see some history. It's a totally different mechanism inside that coupler, and it's KD's first idea on how to make a coupler work. Now that you got the right coupler, it has to be mounted correctly and maintained correctly. One of the biggest problems is coupler height, and it's also fairly easy to fix. But unless you test every car, you don't know you have a problem with coupler heights. So every car on my railroad, before it goes on the railroad, one of the things I check it for is the height of the coupler. I want it centered on the coupler gauge. The trip pin, what looks like an air hose hanging underneath, has to clear the little clearance gauge on the KD coupler height gauge. And of course, it has to have a functioning knuckle spring in the coupler. On the lower left side, you see that kind of reddish tool with some masking tape on it that's holding a spring. That's the original KD tool they came out with for holding those knuckle springs. If you've ever tried any other way to put those in, you find out that they fly a long ways and you never find them again. KD stopped making that tool. I really have no idea how many decades old mine is, but I've been using it forever. Well, in the upper right corner is a tool that works the same kind of idea by Micromark. Works great. It'll hold that coupler spring really nice for you while you put it in place. Another problem with the couplers is how they're installed. We'll start out by Athearn. Athearn used to use a metal clip to hold their couplers in place. And occasionally those clips would pop off the car or come loose from the car, and either the coupler would fall off or the coupler would hang low. Well, a company called A-Line came out with a way to fix that, which also works great for other cars that don't have those metal clips, that have a variety of other ways of holding the coupler in. Kind of the golden rule is don't rely on anything other than a screw that you have tightened to hold your coupler in place. Don't use a friction pin, don't use any other kind of compression. So let's look at this A-Line tool. First thing you do is if you're dealing with the old Athearn is you got to pop that metal clip off of it. And then the A-line tool has two brass spacers, a number 256 tap, and a small drill bit. The idea is you take the brass sleeve, you put it over that little coupler protrusion, the centering post. That brass piece will keep your drill bit centered, and you drill a hole through the center of that post. Then you change to the other brass sleeve, and you use the 256 tap, and you cut threads into that post. Here I'm using it to do it on a tank car from Athearn. Drilling the hole, see the hole going through, and then taking the tap and tapping the threads. Then the kit comes with 1/8 inch long 256 blackened screws. I think the kit comes with about a dozen of them. Well, I've got a couple hundred pieces of rolling stock on my railroad. So I found on Amazon I could get in bags of 100 of those screws quite inexpensively. Blackened number 256 by 1/8 inch long. So that screw will then hold either the original Katie metal cover plate back on or whatever other brand you have. And we'll look at another one here. Here's one on the upper right that I did to a car that didn't have a coupler boss, or I think actually in this one it broke off. And so that's how I used a Katie box to mount it. On the left top is another piece that you want to think about is lubricating the couplers with Katie Greasem. Greasem is powdered graphite. You can also get powdered graphite that's made for lubricating a padlock at your locksmith store. At the bottom is a tank car where it actually uses the bottom strap of the frame to hold the coupler in place. Those are notorious for that plastic piece bending down over time, causing your coupler to droop, which then causes derailments or causes uncoupling. So you can also use that same A-line tool to fix that. The difference is you need to also get a slightly larger drill bit, a number 50, and you have to drill a hole through the cover to have clearance for that 256 screw. You don't want a tight hole where it's going to actually grab the threads, because then as you tighten it, it'll lift the lid off. You want to drill a slightly larger hole than a number 256, which is a number 50 screw. Here's an example of another brand of car where it had a friction pin, or I should say a friction fit. Again, I took the drill bit and drilled that hole that's in the upper right picture, and then tapped it for the 256. I drilled a hole with the number 50 bit through the cover, and then used my 256 screw to hold the coupler in place. So that's couplers. The next thing that people have problems with is derailments caused by problems with the wheels. Well, that's been a lot of change over time. The go-to set of wheels years ago was Central Valley's wheels. They were sprung couplers. They looked pretty nice. They rolled nice. They had metal wheels, but the springs on the sides were a little oversized. Athearn also made sprung wheel sets. They were also oversized. And actually the springing motion in both of those sets of trucks doesn't really work well with the weight, the light weight that we have in an HO piece of rolling stock. So I've gone to all solid frame wheel sets. And if we mount them correctly, you get enough movement out of the wheel set to deal with any undulations in your track. First thing you want to do with a set of trucks is inspect them. If you look at them and go, what the heck is this? This thing's just like a piece of junk. It's way oversized. It's got mismatched parts. The holes aren't centered. Throw it in the trash. If it has flashing, flashing is where a mold starts to wear out. And when they pump the plastic into the mold, a little bit squeezes out between the two halves of the mold. If it's only a thin layer of flashing, you can take a knife and clean those off. Another problem that can happen is warped coupling, warped trucks, especially at a kit that maybe you bought used from somebody else that's been in somebody's garage for 10 years in the heat and it's warped. Throw that one out. One of the key tools I like to use is a truck tuner. I believe the one I have was from Micromark, or it could have been from Reeboks. There's a few different people out there that sell them. It's a steel piece with a sharpened end that fits into one side of the truck, and the other end is a cutting edge that fits into the opposite boss on the truck. And how do you use them? You take out the wheel set, you place the truck tuner in, you turn it, you squeeze it gently and turn it slowly, and you'll feel if there's any flash or any little protrusions inside that bearing surface. As you turn it, you'll feel them get cut away. This isn't meant to cut a whole new shape in there. It's just meant to clean out any stuff. And you're going to be really surprised when you first use one of these that stuff's going to come out. I mean, who would have thought there'd be little tiny bits of flash or little imperfections? It makes a huge difference to clean these. So it takes a few minutes. You put it in one side, you flip it over, then you do the other side and flip it over again. You know, it's amazing how much nicer your wheels will roll. Mounting the trucks. The go-to way for many, many years was called the 3-point mount. You put your trucks on, you tighten one till it just swivels back and forth nice. You take the other truck and you loosen it a little bit so it can rock in all directions. That actually works pretty good. I found another way that I think works even better. We set up what's called gimbals. We set it up so one set of trucks rocks fore and aft, but not side to side. The other truck rides side to side. Another thing with the trucks is no friction pins. Must be held in by screws. So let's look at those truck washers. They're made by a company called Proto 87. I have no stock in the company. I just happen to like their components. They're an incredibly thin stainless steel washer that has little bumps on opposite sides of each washer. And you take your truck off and you glue those over the center boss that your truck is going to be attached to. Just a little bit of ACC, and then you drop it over the pin. And you're going to put one facing across the car and one in line with the car. That way, again, one truck will rock from side to side. The other truck will rock fore and aft. I put those on, then I tighten the screw down till it bottoms out, and then I back it off a quarter of a turn. Trucks will spin back and forth nice and easy, plus they'll do that rocking back and forth and get across any problem track work you have. On some cars, again, especially the old Atherns, that stud that you drop the wheels on was considerably longer than it needed to be. It was so that if you overzealously tightened it, your truck would still spin around. But they're so loose, the truck is just floppy in there. So I take a chisel blade and just shave a little bit off of it to shorten it. Wheels. Metal wheels. All I can say is metal wheels. Use metal wheels. Did you hear me? Let's go with metal wheels. Why? Well, they do a couple of things for you. Plastic wheels are lighter in weight. Plastic wheels tend to get gunked up with stuff off your track. The metal wheels gives a little bit more weight down low, weight that isn't bouncing back and forth up in the car. They're easier to clean. And if you're like me, where I use detection on parts of my railroad for part of my dispatching system, you can add resistors to the wheels. There's a variety of brands of metal wheels out there. Your flavor can vary. On the bottom left is the Kadee metal wheels. I used those exclusively for a lot of years. And then I actually found on some trains that had run a long time, they were having problems. And I found that the plastic point was damaged. The other problem with the Kadee wheels is they're a sintered metal with paint on them, some kind of paint coating, or if not paint, it might be some chemical coating. But as you start to run those, I used to think it was cool. They get that nice shiny spot down the middle on the tread. Well, the problem is that nice shiny spot is there because that black stuff has worn off, and is all over your track. Myself, I prefer to Intermountain wheels. Not to say that they're that much greater than any other metal wheel, but it's what I've standardized on. I do like the metal axles, and I do like the metal wheels. Another thing you want to look at with wheels, it really doesn't matter what you have if they don't fit. So the first thing you want to do is check every wheel you have, every axle you have against the NMRA gauge. I remember years ago, I was building Walther's cars, back then with plastic wheels on metal axles, and almost every single axle was out of gauge. So I check them all. Axle lengths. There was a company, unfortunately, I believe they're gone now, called Reeboks, that really pushed hard on the idea of putting the right length axle so your wheels don't go slop from side to side. In testing that we did at a club I was in, we found that if you put in the correct metal wheels, metal axles, the right length, the cars would roll forever. Well, Reeboks isn't around anymore, but there are other companies that have different axle lengths. So you can still do that if you want to. Myself, I've given up on it, and I'm just using my standard wheels from Intermountain. You want to test roll your trucks and your wheels. Just put your finger on top of it, roll it back and forth, a piece of test track. You'll feel right away if it's not rolling smooth or if there's a wobble. If there is, fix it before you put it on your car. That piece of metal in my hand is, if you don't have one, shame on you. You need to have a standards gauge. You can use it for so many things on your layout, but in this case, we're talking about your wheel gauge, making sure it's correct. If it doesn't drop in those two slots, another set of wheels. If you are going to try to deal with the axle lengths, get a caliper so you can determine the actual length. On the right side was Reebok sold a sample pack. It was one axle of every size that they made. You might still find those on eBay or in a hobby shop, and you might still find some of their wheels. How about car weight? This is another NMRA standard that people lived or died by for many years. Well, why did the NMRA have that standard? We used to be dealing with cars that weren't made as nice and fine tooling as we have now. We had track work that was mostly snap track. So the idea is if I get all my cars to weigh the same amount per inch of length, then my train will roll real nice. The problems you run into if you don't follow that rule, if you have cars that are too heavy, you can't pull as many cars up the hill. If you have really heavy cars at the back of your train and you're going around a corner, you can do what's called string lining, where it's where your car will tend to tip over to the inside. If your cars are too light, you hit a piece of bad track, they're going to derail. You can also have string lining problems. I decided on my railroad, I make sure my cars work correctly. I make sure my couplers are good. I make sure my wheels are spin freely, and I don't worry about exactly the weight. For example, on my railroad, you're supposed to do what the real railroad does. If you have an empty open car, an empty gondola, an empty flat car, it gets put at the rear of the train. So I don't worry about adding a lot of weight to empty flat cars. They just have to be handled at the rear of the train. If somebody doesn't pay attention to that, well, they get embarrassed when they have a derailment for not following the rules. So whether or not you choose to make your cars heavy is up to you. If whatever you choose to do with weight, do make sure they're balanced. I had a great idea many years ago. I thought I got my hands on some lead BBs and I put them in the bottom of the car and I put a piece of electrical tape on top to hold them in place. Worked great for a few years. Well, the electrical tape didn't hold. So then the BBs got loose. And of course, these were in cars that were all glued closed. So then you'd have the BBs all shift to one side of the car, and the car would go down the railroad leaning to one side and would derail. Those cars are gone now. So if you are going to use something like BBs, find a better way to glue them in. I found an even easier place to get some good weight if you choose to add weight to your cars. On the right-hand side is coupler wheel weights. You used to be able to go to any tire shop and get those in lead. Well, they don't have lead ones anymore. They have steel, but they're still fairly heavy. They're just not quite as heavy as the lead. On the left is a piece of sheet lead. Years ago, I went to the local hardware store and I bought a 25-pound roll of lead roof flashing. I think I've had it for about 20 years, and I think I still have 20 pounds of it left. So if you're ever in Paso Robles, California, come on by and I'll give you a pound. But what's nice with that is it's a thin piece of lead. You can fold it, bend it, smash it, fit it into the nooks and crannies. I do find it really useful for adding weight to locomotives. Well, that's my ideas on how to keep my rolling stock running good. I'd like to talk for a minute about some of the tools I have found that make my job easier of keeping my railroad operating. So I'll kind of go from clockwise, starting up at the top. There's a Reebok's set of different axle length wheel sets. In the center is a couple of pin vices with the drill bits and the tap from A-line. And then comes those little gimbaled washers. Then some fine screwdrivers. One thing you want to do with screwdrivers is get a good screwdriver so that the tip is properly shaped and it doesn't fail on you, it doesn't wear. And I also magnetize all my screwdrivers. It makes it much easier for holding a screw. Then above that is my favorite brand of super glue, or ACC. We'll look at that in a moment. And then some lead at the bottom, a coupler greasem, a coupler trip pin height tool, and some sprue cutters. So my tools for lots of use: that magnetic tip screwdriver, the tool for cleaning out the wheel journals, some KD greasem, and my calipers. I also use the calipers a lot when I'm building structures to determine what is the actual dimensions of these pieces of material I have. I also like a foam cradle. I happen to cover my foam cradle with a piece of plastic. It's the plastic that a brass locomotive would be wrapped in. Otherwise, fine details tend to get stuck in the foam. Foam cradle makes it really nice to not damage fine details while you're working on a car. Below that, you see my test track. Just some good old Atlas snap track re-railers and 2 KD gauges. Makes it real easy to take any piece of rolling stock or locomotive and rail it, slide it down, check my coupler heights. In the center is a cat food stainless steel dish. A very similar thing you can often get for free with a coupon at Harbor Freight. They give them away every once in a while if you have the coupon. Makes it real nice as you're working on something, someplace to keep all those little parts that otherwise disappear into your carpet or onto your floor. On top of that is my most often used tool is an optivisor. As I aged, I also found that besides don't see so well, light really helps. Well, there's a company that makes this piece that you put on the front of your optivisor that has 6 bright LEDs. It really makes it much easier to look down and see what it is I'm trying to work on. Again, the Reebok's wheels, and then that Loctite super glue. The reason I like the Loctite, the bottle stands upright real easily. The bottle is designed that when you stand it upright, the liquid drains back into the bottle, and that black cap fits really tight. I don't remember the last time I've thrown one of these bottles away that wasn't empty. They don't clog. Another thing about super glue, I live near a guy called Bob Smith Industries. If you go in your hobby shop and you see ACC glue and it says the name of the hobby shop on it, that's from Bob Smith Industries. He sells it with their hobby shop's name on it. I asked him about problems with clogging ACC. I told him, a lot of people say put it in the refrigerator. He says that is the absolute worst thing to do, is putting in the refrigerator or freezer. ACC kicks off from moisture. Inside your freezer is dry, but when you take the bottle out, it condenses moisture out of the air and causes your ACC to go off. He says, just keep the bottle upright and don't put it in the refrigerator or freezer. Another tool I use a lot of is those yellow things on the upper right. Those are little tiny micro brushes. I get them on Amazon. Just put in Amazon makeup brushes. They have a variety of sizes. That's how I apply glue. And I have them in a variety of tip sizes from really tiny to fairly wide. And then the bottom right, you see an upside down medicine cup. Again, it's an Amazon purchase. I think it's like $5 for 100 of them. I turn them upside down, put a little drop of either the ACC, or if I'm building a wood kit, wood glue, and then use my little micro brushes to pick up just a little bit of glue to do the job I need to do without making a mess. Having good X-Acto knife blades, start every job with a fresh blade. You can't tell that it's dull, but it really is dull. Have a tool for dealing with those coupler springs. Have a KD gauge. NMRA gauge. Well, I hope this will help you get through some of the problems with your rolling stock. The fun of the railroad is to operate it and to build it. The fun is not dealing with derailments, which always happen when you have guests over. They always happen during an op session. I hope that you enjoyed this presentation, and I'll be around later for the Zoom discussions. Thank you.
Well, we can forget about the being around later for Zoom discussions. That just happens to be what we did for the convention. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great information there. And some stuff to me is, you might start a holy war if you talk to the wrong person about weight. Because there are people that are like really staunchly married to what's on RP 20.1 or whatever it is from the NMRA standards, or it's actually a recommended practice, not standard. So anyway.
Yeah, John, it's, as I think I said in the beginning, and if not, I'll say it again now. This was my way of doing things on my railroad. Yeah. It's not to say what you do on your railroad. Yeah. There are a lot of wonderful operating railroads out there that do things their way also. Yeah. It's just, these things work for me. Yep. An example, if you go down to La Mesa Club in San Diego, they have an incredibly rigorous inspection program for their rolling stock, including they have a device where the car has to lean so far to the side, and when you let it go, it has to drop back on the rails. And that's based not just on the weight of the car, but how high or low the weight is in the car. If it doesn't pass that test, it doesn't go on their railroad. And they run 100-car trains all day long, and they don't have any problems. But again, that's a difference. They're running 100-car trains that people are watching go by, where I'm trying to make it for my operators to have to think more realistically. And it works for me.
Yep. And as long as it works for you, and as long as you're having fun, that's what they say, right? That's,
yeah.
If it's fun and if it works for you, you're doing it right.
Yeah. And I still do have that 20 some odd pounds of lead. If anybody needs some, come pick it up.
Yeah. I've bought some of those little pieces of lead as well, or I don't even know if mine's lead, but they're 1/4 ounce stickers. And I think to repeat, I don't know that people realize they're made for balancing motorcycle wheels. So you can get them from the auto parts store cheaper than you can get them from, Micro Mark or one of those places. I remember one time I did a cost analysis. There was some kit for putting weight into your rolling stock, and they had it for sale. It had a weight, or not a weight, a scale, and then, some small amount of the little lead weights, and they wanted like $30 for it. And I did a little analysis, like, well, if I get a scale from Amazon and I get those weights, stick-on weights for motorcycle wheels from Amazon, it was like $10. So you can get this stuff cheaply. And we were talking, I think it was yesterday, about weight as well. And I've mentioned that a lot of people also use pennies to add weight.
Yeah.
I think that the most important thing when it comes, if you're going to add weight, is to make sure that you're evenly distributing it. And it's best to put the weight over the wheel sets, is what I've found. So.
Yeah. And somebody else just posted, they think the more important thing is to be consistent. And I agree with them.
Yeah.
If you come up with a standard for what you're going to do on your railroad and stick to it, do not let one car on the railroad that didn't meet whatever your standard is.
Right.
Another question that popped up, what do I do about cleaning my wheels? Well, that's another huge discussion. One is I'm fortunate. My railroad is in the house, so it's an air-conditioned space. It's not real dusty like a garage or other places. So except for when I'm doing scenery work, my track stays pretty darn clean. I also use Masonite slider track cars. I have more than a dozen running around in every train so that they're constantly scrubbing the rails clean. But your wheels still occasionally pick up a little bit of junk. So for locomotives, I take some alcohol on a paper towel and run half the locomotive up onto it, run the RPMs up, and scrub the wheels clean. For rolling stock, if I notice a piece of rolling stock is wobbling, I take it off. And sometimes it did pick up a little piece of something. And I start gentle and go rough. So I'll start with one of my little micro brushes and a little bit of alcohol and clean that piece of goober off the tread. If that doesn't work, I'll go after it with a knife. If that doesn't work, I replace the wheels. A friend of ours' railroad isn't as in a clean environment as mine. He has some felt pieces that are next to a piece of track he bought somewhere. This isn't a homemade thing that you soak with alcohol and then you take the car and run it back and forth across that, and it cleans the wheel treads.
I think I've seen that felt thing before. So,
I have one in a box somewhere. I thought I'd put it in on the railroad, but I never did.
Right. I don't know if you saw it, Paul, but I made a comment during the presentation that I've talked to some operators, some layout owners that do regular operations, and they say they hardly ever have to clean their track because they run often enough and the metal wheels on the metal rails keep it clean enough that they don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Have you had any experience with that?
Like I said, I find the same thing, but actually it's the metal wheels. Plus I really believe in those good old fashioned Masonite sliders that I think I picked that up maybe in the 80s or 70s from a model railroader article.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's asking about going over the A-line drill kit.
Isn't this convenient? He has his stuff right there, everybody. Look at this guy. He looks like he's prepared or something.
Well, I happen to be in my layout room where my tools are all in a nice toolbox. So the A-line kit has, let's see, is it? Oh, there. Little brass sleeve with a hole through the center. And there's two different sizes. On one, the hole is set for the drill bit, and the other, it is set for the tap.
They look like used shell casings.
Yeah, but a lot heavier. They're solid pieces with just the clearance hole. And then it comes with the right size drill bit for drilling prior to putting the threads on, and then a 256 tap. I did change out the tap that came with it on mine for what's called a bottoming tap. A bottoming tap just has threads closer to the tip because on some cars, like a tank car, you don't want to drill all the way through because then you wind up with a hole in the top of the walkway. And it comes with a bunch of those little screws, but I bought more screws. And the key thing is if you're using it with some other than the Athearn clip, and you have to drill a hole through the plastic coupler cover, then you have to drill that hole a little larger so that the screw can spin freely. Otherwise, the screw will tend to grab threads there, and the cover will never go down smooth. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, Stephen, if that doesn't answer the question fully enough, you're welcome to put a follow-up in. And by the way, I mentioned it before, but in case you just tuned in recently, we're doing the Q&A for the fine-tuning of rolling stock now. And if you have a question, you can put it into the chat on the side of the screen there. I do want to mention something else, Paul, and I think it's more of an N-scale thing nowadays because most HO stuff has this already. But could you talk about the difference or the importance of having truck-mounted couplers body-mounted couplers instead of truck-mounted couplers? Because
Sure.
a lot of N-scale stuff still comes with truck-mounted couplers, and I find that the body-mounted ones work a lot better.
So the problem with truck mounted, the difficulty that it can cause you, is when you're pushing that car, like backing up a train. The forces against the coupler, instead of transferring to the body of the car, they transfer to the truck and tend to push the truck to one side or the other. And when that happens, that makes it real simple for the flange on the wheel to catch something and derail the car. I know the only thing I have that is truck mounted is some passenger cars. That's the way they came, and I've not bothered to try to figure out a way because the only time I back up my passenger train is when I'm resetting the layout for an op session.
Yeah. I know that they
somebody
put
else
truck
asked.
mounted. Oh, sorry. I know that they put
No,
truck
go ahead.
mounted couplers on some models to help it go around tighter radius curves. So, I mean,
That's true.
sometimes it's a compromise that you need to have just based on your layout. But anytime I've found that if you can have truck mounted, body mounted, they do tend to work better. And especially on N scale, I tend to run long trains at the SBHRS layout, 30 cars plus to me is a long train. And if I don't have truck mounted, body mounted, I keep doing that. If I don't have body mounted couplers, it's especially when you're backing up, like you said, Paul, it just kind of goes, and, and if it's a light car, that tends to happen also. It's much easier to push a light car off or string line a light car than it is a heavy car. So,
yeah, that's the advantage to weighing your cars heavily. And that's where I believe the NMRA, besides trying to have everything weigh the same, they're a bit heavy, is they track better.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I had this up. You looked like you were starting to answer it, but I wanted to talk about the body mounted couplers a little bit more there for a second. But you want to take this one?
Getting the couplers right a lot of times will help with poorly designed inclines. That's true. My way of building my railroad again is I started with the bench work being correct and didn't go cheap on materials. I waited till I could afford it because everything resides on the bench work and then the track work being done correctly, because the railroad doesn't work if you don't have good track work, and you just keep going as you go up to good stuff. But yeah, you could have some what my friends like to call SP trackage, where it's not real straight and flat. Where the heavier car, the correct couplers, they'll help you get through that. Another question was about the sliders. So here's a car, and it's a little hard to see, thankfully, that there's this block of masonite underneath. The car has 2 holes drilled in the bottom, piece of masonite with 2 nails glued on top, and it free floats inside that car. So just the weight of the masonite in those two nails caused that piece of masonite to just ride on the rail and slowly scrub it. But it's light enough that if it hits a frog or something, it just lifts up. And you also taper them a little bit. And if you look at the bottom, it's not very dirty. I'm not sure how long this car's been on the railroad, but like I said, there's at least a dozen of them running around, and they're not that dirty because they keep it pretty clean. And I keep the railroad pretty clean.
The other cool thing about those types of cleaning cars is they're cheap to make.
Yeah.
Right? A piece of masonite, some hot glue, and a couple of nails. Oh, and a drill bit to put the holes in the bottom of the car that you don't really care about anyway, right? I mean, that's...
Yeah. And you want those holes to be sloppy. Not real sloppy, but a little bit sloppy. So those... And don't use cement-coated nails. You got to actually use the cheaper nails. And I used epoxy to glue those on. It works. You know, I really very seldom have to clean even my locomotive wheels.
Yeah. Probably having to do more with running the layout as often, or operating the layout as often as you do. That's great, though. There's all kinds of...
I was surprised. I didn't run for 2 years almost. And I did a lot of scenery work over those 2 years. And once I cleaned the track where I did the scenery, the rest of the railroad track was actually still decent.
Yeah.
I still ran a cleaning train. Oh, I do have a couple other cleaning cars, and they're actually an example of a truck-mounted couplers I have. I have some of the very original centerline cars that have their solid brass body with a brass wheel you wrap with a handy wipe. And the original ones used KD coupler-mounted trucks. And when I do a cleanup, I put one on each end of the cleaning train, which means I'm pushing one of those cars, and it will occasionally derail because it doesn't like that coupler being pushed against the wheels.
Right. What about those? I've seen these. It looks like a barrel that gets rolled along the track, and it has abrasive stuff all around it. Do you use those too?
I also have the cleaning train I run is 2 centerline cars, 2 locomotives, and 2 of those cars were made by a company called Aztec. And they do have a roller that is just 1 or 2 degrees off of square to the rail. So it scrubs a little bit as it goes, and they're covered with what they called Crayex. And they gently scrub the top of the rail. That is my cleaning train that I run once in a blue moon. From what I understand, though, they went out of business.
Okay. Was that Aztec, AZTEK?
Either TEK or TEC.
I think I remember seeing that.
It's funny, being in the layout room, everything is handy.
Yep.
Here is the car.
Yep, that's what I was talking about. There you go.
Yeah, and it's this particular one they made came with model die casting bodies. And that's because Aztec back then was in the same town as model die casting was. So they used model die casting stuff. So actually this is not the box car that came on it. I changed it to one that's appropriate for my railroad, and it runs in my Coast Mail, a train that runs every session.
There you go. One of the things that I've noticed at club layouts is they'll have rules written on the club rules that if you run a train, any train on the layout, you have to always have at least one of those masonite scrubbers going with it. Not everybody does. They're supposed to, but they don't.
Yeah.
I was going to mention something about coupler height, because coupler height is one of those things, especially new people, I think, don't really get. And I've even had people argue with me that coupler height doesn't matter, because you ever looked at a real train? their couplers are off all over the place. Well, on a real train, you have a coupler, that big. And if it's off by a few inches, it's still doing mostly what it needs to do because of the contact. And you got to remember that, mass does not scale down to,
No.
and especially the materials too, right? I mean, I think if you do the calculations on scaling down actual weight, you could not make a model rail car weigh enough to properly scale it down from what it weighs in real life. I don't think there are
Yep.
materials heavy enough unless you can get plutonium or uranium somewhere to add to your model, So
Yeah.
that's another interesting concept, I think. And maybe talk about that. We should talk a little bit about coupler height. I know you did cover it during the presentation, but I think it's one of those things that deserves some emphasis just because newer people, I think, don't really get it.
And with coupler height, most of the ready to roll stuff that's out there today, they're dead on correct. Most, not all. And they stay that way, hopefully. uh, us that are using either just, if you're going to go to the swap meet and get some old shake the box kits from Athearn or Model Die Casting or some other older brands, those couplers heights may be a little off. Matter of fact, Katie sells two different thicknesses of washers that really were designed to work with Athearn rolling stock, which was a little bit low for their coupler height. And then Katie makes couplers with up shank and down shank heads so that you can deal with cars that are way off the correct height. If you make everything as perfect as you can, that's a goal. You're never going to get completely perfect. The more perfect you make it, the closer you make it to whatever standard you decide to follow, the more reliable your trains are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, could you have slightly mismatched couplers? If your track work is perfect, yeah, that'll probably never uncouple. I don't know of anybody, including me, who has spent years laying on my track, that there's not going to be some little whoop-de-doo somewhere, either originally or happened over time. And if things are just a little bit off, yeah, your coupler may uncouple.
Yeah.
And when will it uncouple? When you have a crowd of people over.
Yeah. When you least want it to is the answer.
Yes.
I've noticed that. Yeah, I've noticed that whenever I go to do a layout tour at a layout, that's when all the problems happen. And I know it's because the camera's on. There's no other reason for it. The camera's on. We're trying to do something semi-serious. I mean, we always have fun when we do layout tours, but and it's fun. It's actually fun sometimes that people get very embarrassed. It's like, what? This happens every time, so don't even worry about it. That's my attitude, But
and there's some cars, especially older ones. I haven't seen it in any new ones, but I don't buy that many new pieces of rolling stock, where the coupler box is sloppy and the coupler will droop a little bit in the box. And what I have done in the past, I've since got rid of those cars, but what I've done in the past is to glue a very thin piece of styrene across the bottom lip of the coupler box for the coupler shank to lay on to hold it straight. What I've been doing recently is now that I operate all the time and lots of other things are done, I find I have too many pieces of rolling stock. So I'm culling the herd by getting rid of stuff that is less prototypical. I mean, not exact, but less prototypical than or less quality of cars or cast on parts versus nice detail parts.
Sure.
So as I do that, I get rid of some of those old problems.
That makes
But I
sense.
still do have on the railroad. I don't know how many people have ever heard of a guy named Jim Vale. Jim was one of the original master model railroaders and a really, really nice guy that his goal in life seemed to be help us all be better railroaders. Well, he passed away, and I was fortunate to get some HO rolling stock because he had a small HO loop that ran under his HON3.
Mhm.
So I got some of his HO rolling stock, which is old stuff. And I will do whatever I have to do to keep that on the railroad running as an honorum to Jim. So actually, I have a couple of old wood kits cars that Jim built that are running on the railroad.
Yeah. I remember Jim Vale's layout. We did a layout tour there, as I'm sure you know. And it was, I believe, the last time the railroad ever ran. And
It's
there's
the
a,
last time it existed. It was torn down
yeah,
after that. I
yep,
know because I also have some buildings off of it.
right. And I just saw another couple of, or, well, a scene off of it up at the California State Railroad Museum in the Magic of Scale model railroading display that they exhibit that they have up there. His whole, I don't know, I'm assuming you probably know this. I think most people that know about Jim Vale know that his entire West Side Lumber Company scene is saved at the museum, and I hope that stays there for a really long time.
And I know we got to take a little sidetrack. Speaking about that, there was another scene. It's the beehive charcoal ovens, also from his that are in the museum, and that's all they had planned on. And a gentleman purchased the scene of the sawmill from Jim's estate. Actually, the day I was there, um, helping a little bit and buying my buildings. And after he got it home, he looked at it and said, "Nah, this belongs in a museum."
Mm-hmm.
So he turned around after purchasing it and donated it, and it's now part of that, and which is wonderful because it's an incredible scene. One thing I'll say about Jim and how he inspired me, I believe he had more detail in any square foot of his layout than most people have on their entire layout. And his idea was not that he is anything great, it's just how can I help you have more fun with your hobby? That's why I really like that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a good attitude to have. And I've encountered a lot of people in my time making videos about this stuff. Practically everybody I've done layout tours with or any kind of video with has that same attitude. I mean, obviously they do, otherwise they wouldn't be sharing, right?
Yeah.
So I have a story I want to tell about Jim. This isn't the Jim Vale show, but I want to tell this story because I think it's interesting. I never met Jim in person. I had done layout tours of our mutual friend Dave Adams' layout. And I don't know if you know Guy Cantwell. I'd be surprised if you don't. He's in SoCal, and not SoCal, but SoCal in the Santa Cruz area, Soquel. And they were both very good friends of Jim's. And they both told me when I did their layout tours, respectively, that they highly recommended to go do a layout tour of Jim Vale's layout. Jim Vale, Jim Vale, Jim Vale. He kept talking about Jim Vale. And so they obviously held him in very high regard. But the other part of the message I was getting from them is he's not in really great health. So you might want to get on that. So I had a list that I was keeping of all the different people that I wanted to talk to about doing layout tours. And his was the first name on that list. And as things go, you get busy and stuff doesn't happen off your list for a while. And the same week that I was going to call him, I got an email from, I think, Dave Adams that Jim Vale had died, and that, it was a sad thing. It was a moment. It was an important event because, he wrote hundreds of articles for the Narrow Gauge and Short Line Gazette. And so it was an important event for a lot of people, and also especially for his friends. So I thought, well, that sucks. I was going to call him, and now I can't call him because they don't have a telephone that goes to where he is now. And so I got in touch with Dave, or Dave got in touch with me, Dave Adams, and we decided mutually that his layout was too important not to document. So Dave arranged with a bunch of the regular guys from Jim's layout to make it operable one more time so that we could document it on video. And so we did. And there's a whole other story that goes along with that. Dave and I were in a car accident the day as we were driving to Santa Cruz to do Jim Vale's layout tour. Our car got totaled, but we went anyway because we were still in one piece. Yeah, that's another interesting story. But what I wanted to say about it is that the friendships that Jim created with guys like Dave and Guy and other people in my area here made me realize, not having met him myself, what a special guy he was. Because for some people you wouldn't go to lengths like that and to document his layout. And luckily his daughter Kate was on board with it too. She even appears in the video. I don't know how many people here have watched it, but I just thought it was a really cool sort of tribute to Jim. The fact that all those people came together and made the video possible, including Kate. So it's a special video to me for those reasons. And not having met him, I really wish that I had met him, because he obviously was a quality guy that everybody liked. So
yeah,
that's about as nice of a thing I think as I've said about anybody.
yeah.
Oh, sorry, but to go back onto our topic here of tuning rolling stock.
Well, people have been asking about remote uncoupling, and there's a
Yes.
couple of different side discussions about that.
Yep.
I don't use it myself because my layout was designed so the operators can reach in and do the manual uncoupling. Although there are a number of layouts that have use the magnets underneath the track or the electromagnets. Trying to think, there's some famous layout that I've operated on that has one industry you can't reach into to uncouple, and they have a magnet there, and they mark the side with little bit of paint so you know where the hidden magnet is, because it's a museum quality layout. It works well. If you're going to do that, it is so critical that the little air hoses on the Cadies are at the right height, and that your Cadies really swing easily from side to side. But it works. I don't choose to use it. There are some issues with it if you accidentally get slack in a train as you go across a magnet, but you can work around those. It's fun. Somebody else mentioned at Silicon Valley Lines, which is a wonderful layout in the Bay Area, that somebody there is working on using memory wire to remotely operate the movement of a coupler. Like I said, I used to be in 1:20 scale, and in garden railroading, they came out with a way to do that in the large scale. It was interesting. I looked at it. In the large scale, the problem was it was expensive, and you really only did it to your locomotive. So it'd be interesting to see this thing that Silicon Valley Lines is working on. They come up with some pretty cool, unique stuff, and they're
They
a big
do.
enough layout they can test it.
Yeah. And the cool thing about Silicon Valley Lines, I've done a number of videos and am friends with a bunch of people over there. I go to operate there quite often. Well, they don't have this motto. I think Seth Newman gave it to them, which is Silicon Valley Lines, because we can. And one of the members there has told me something to the effect of, well, just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should. Because, they test all kinds of really interesting technology, and it doesn't always work. And sometimes trying to make it work, you get to the point of diminishing returns, right? Where it's like, well, we got like 150 hours into this and it's just not doing what we need it to do. So why don't we just, cut our losses while we're way behind?
But until somebody smoke tests it, we won't know.
It's true. Yeah.
And I'll tell you how long I've been doing this. At the 2000 NMRA convention, the club I was in at that time set up the first in the United States Fremo setup. And actually, it was a combination of NMRA modules and Fremo. And it was also the first large layout to use NCE DCC. And Jim Scorsese from NCE was there, and Mark Gurries, who's involved with Silicon Valley Lines, was there, because this was it. This was the first big use of it. And I had the first train to go out. And as my train was going down the track, it caught fire. The locomotives were running with smoke and visible flame, and it kept running. So obviously, we shut the whole thing down. And what the hell happened? That's when they found out, as you cross booster districts, your two boosters can be out of sync. Their electrical phase can be 180 out. And what happened is, as the locomotive crossed the gap, the front truck was one side of the sine wave, the rear truck was the other side. The wire between the two trucks became a fuse and caught fire. So we obviously shut down, and Scorsese came over, and they got an oscilloscope out, and that's when they figured out, if you're going to use multiple boosters, you need to take a wire and connect the metal case of the two boosters. Unfortunately, they use the word grounding. You're not grounding it like an electrical ground. You need to connect the two metal cases, and that forces the sine waves to match.
Yeah, I was going to comment this similar comment to what I just put up on the screen here. Was it a GE at least? Because GEs are
actually
known
it was E3s, 4 of them in a row, pulling a big train. And I will say this about Jim: besides they took a couple hours and they figured out what to do, he also took my engines away. He brought them back the next day, completely repaired, brand new NCE decoders in them, and ready to go.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention also. Oh, go ahead, Paul.
No, it's just that we looking at some of these comments of new things. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're constantly trying new stuff. Somebody mentioned MTH is putting the remote uncouplers on some of their locomotives. Well, MTH stopped working, and somebody else posted it didn't work that well. But they tried, and it looks like Silicon Valley is trying. Mm-hmm. And we used to use X2Fs, and somebody named Katie came up with the idea of the Katie couplers. And somebody came up with the idea of DCC. Or now the new Dead Rail Society. The idea of using tiny little lithium batteries and not having power. My garden railroad was all battery operated because I didn't have to clean any track. So, we're in a hobby that some of our members are people who like to tinker and invent things. Mm-hmm. That's how we went from an X-Acto knife and a block of balsa wood to the beautiful rolling stock we have now.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting about Silicon Valley Lines. They are actually trying to perfect this uncoupling because they do remote operations. And if you can perfect remote uncoupling as well, you could do a remote operation from anywhere in the world. And one of the viewers right now, Andy Ambrose, is on. He's over in the UK, and he joined Silicon Valley Lines 4,000 or 5,000 miles away because of their virtual operations. And I think that's a really cool thing. One of the reasons why I like to put on shows like this virtually is because there are people in other places that just can't get to, have these conversations unless it's done over the internet. I think that's great. I mean, we should try to reach as many people as possible, right?
Yeah.
So the bigger the audience, the better it is for the hobby, I think.
I'm installing. I'm almost done. I have actually 6 more wires to connect, believe it or not, but they're in a place that's hard for me to work. I'll have full CTC on the middle section of my railroad, and the whole system was designed that using JRMI, someone will be able to remote dispatch. Mm-hmm. So we haven't tried it yet, but the idea is to be able to remote dispatch. And then working with a friend in Canada using receipt printers, the idea is we'll be able to have the dispatcher write train orders remotely and have them print out at the proper locations on the railroad for the parts of the railroad. My railroad is timetable train order, CTC timetable train order, because that's what the SP did in 1949 and Cuesta. But the idea is that I can then have Andy Ambrose, I think is the guy you're talking about from England,
Yep.
could dispatch my railroad from the other side of the pond, including writing train orders.
Yeah.
You know, and it's the guy who gave me the idea up in Canada. He just happens to use the receipt printers to print his switch lists because he likes how small it is and stuff. And we started talking, and he mentioned, you know, they're just whatever that, can't think of the word, a URL that you can assign to the printer. So yeah, you could set up remotely to connect to those printers and print them. So we'll try that, and who knows, maybe that'll be a future discussion if we can get it to work.
I think
And
that's
if
a
we can't
pretty
get it to
cool
work,
idea.
oh well. Yeah.
At least you tried.
Yeah.
Right.
And again, it's not truly prototypical because in the real world, the dispatcher would be dictating that train order to a clerk. But my railroad room isn't convenient. There isn't convenient space for clerks.
Right.
So I'm not going to do that.
Well, also, if you think about it, Paul, and Seth Newman made this point on a Model Railroading 101 video that I did with him about operations on model railroads. If you think about it, you want to compress some of the jobs as well, because not everybody, or probably most people, don't want to be a clerk, because that's not really an exciting job on the and some people would. Don't get me wrong, some people would love to be a clerk. But what I'm saying is, you know, most people don't want to do that. They want to run trains, or they want to, you know, work a yard. So you compress jobs out too. So there's nothing wrong with not having space for clerks, right?
Yep, exactly. You know,
So,
and my railroad is 1949 on the SP, and I met a guy who was a boomer brakeman that worked on the SP during the fruit season when they needed more bodies. And he talked about his job for the day would be the brakeman riding like the 40th car on a freight train going up over Cuesta Grade just so he could handle setting the retainers. Well, how would you like to do that on a model railroad?
yeah, I mean, talk about a boring job, right?
Yeah. Oh, somebody asked a really good question. I love it. Do I have any fantasy items on my railway, or is everything prototypical? Yes, I do. And I love humor. And there are a few things on my railroad that I love it when somebody is looking at a scene and goes, "What?" So I'll tell you one of them is, and it moves around my railroad. Bigfoot is on my railroad. I found an HO version of Bigfoot, and he is in the bushes somewhere to see if anybody spots it. And another one is, I'm a fan of Lord of the Rings, and a very long time ago, back when it was just the books, before there were any movies, there's a company near my area that makes metal figurines for wartime gaming and fantasy games, and they had a golem. So I have this little golem that is, it's not in place yet. It's going to go into one of my towns. It's going to be on a statue in the town square
Huh.
of the golem. You know, it's different than the golem you see in the movies because it was, again, before they movied it. So yeah, I do have some fun fantasy things on the railroad, and I try to make it fun. And there's also honorariums to people. So even though I'm modeling a specific location, somebody will come into my railroad and they'll look at the freight house in San Luis Obispo and they'll say, "Huh? That's not right." Yeah, you're exactly correct. It's right. Not right. It's the freight house off Jim Vale's layout, and that will stay there. It's not
Well,
truly fantasy, but it's not correct for the SP.
but it is right because you want it there. So,
Yes.
right. You know, we were talking about this yesterday when we were doing our little test run about this sign, you know, bringing back Jim Vale, about the sign that he had in his, on the way down to his layout. I was mentioning this to Paul. I think he went to go get it because he actually has this sign from Jim Vale's. There it is, from Jim Vale's layout. I remembered this. Take a look at this, guys. This is a really good thing to remember. This is my railroad. It is built just the way I like it. Before you have any comments on any changes, corrections, or additions I should make, notice the mistletoe hanging from my shirt tail. In other words, kiss my, well, I won't say it. I have a saying that goes right along with that, which is the older I get, the more everybody can kiss my ass because I don't care what you think.
You know, it's the idea is to have fun.
Yep.
It really is to have fun. And I've operated on hundreds of layouts all over the United States and Canada, and no two are the same. And I steal ideas from every place I go. There's a guy up in, I think he's Seattle area from, I think it was Sound Rails, that had a novel idea. Instead of fast clocks can be difficult if you're trying to do switching, because switching kind of takes real time. He instead figured out how long does it actually take his model train to go from town to town. And that's the amount of time he allots in the timetable for the train to get from town to town. And he took an Excel spreadsheet and using the time function, he puts in what time the op session is going to start, and it automatically adjusts all the times in the timetable for the time that he determined between each town. So my normal op sessions start at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I've entered that into the spreadsheet, and all my times are real times. So if you're operating on my railroad, you can either look at your watch or look at the clocks on the wall at the real time, and that's what's on the timetable.
Huh, interesting.
So I have compressed the time between towns, but it's still the real clock. So that people switching, they can look at their watch and go, oh, okay, half an hour from now, the daylight's coming through and I got to be out of the way.
Huh. That's an interesting way of an old idea, right? I like that.
Yeah. A guy named Brian Ferris is the guy's name that I stole that from. I don't know if I've invented anything with model railroading. I think everything I do, somebody else invented.
Yeah, that reminds me.
Decided.
We were talking about weight before, and I actually have this here. I'm going to see if I can show it because I think it's a cool idea. If you're one of the people that wants to do weighted cars and you want to do it to the NMRA recommended practice, it was really a funny story, Paul. I had invented and paid to have someone write an app for a phone where all you had to do is put in and I thought it was a really smart, brilliant idea, where all you had to do was enter the length of the car and then the app would calculate the weight for you. And then I was online, and I don't remember who showed this online, but they showed this. This is a sheet of paper that has the weights for your respective rolling stock listed. Oh, it's going in and out of focus. Stupid thing. I hate autofocus, but I use it for these because it's usually just on my face. But the point is it has weights listed. And all you have to do is set a car down on the paper and it tells you how much it should weigh because it's listed out. It takes about half a second to figure out how much your weight should be on a car just by laying it on this. And so what I did, because I model in HO and also in N scale, so I have HO on this side and I have N scale on this side. And I'm just using the recommended weights for the NMRA because I don't have my own railroad. And I figure, you know what? They've been around forever and should know what they're doing. So if my stuff is similar to what they say, it should work all right. And I haven't had any problems running at the SBHRS anyway. But I also tend to, when I'm running N scale, which is all my properly weighted stuff, I run all my stuff only. I don't run any club cars or anything like that. Then it works out really well. One of the cool things about the weight, I guess, recommended practice for N scale anyway, is that it looks like it behaves like a real train, meaning there's slack action that comes out when you start, and you can hear it on the little couplers, just, you know, like on a real train, but, you know, scaled way down, of course. And the momentum in the train, because I set my locomotives with momentum, it just looks more prototypical, and the whole train operates more prototypically, and it doesn't get any of that I call it the inchworm effect, where like usually it's the caboose that goes, you know, it's like going in and out of slack the whole time. But if it's properly weighted, it weights down the end of the train, just like you would expect it to in real life, and it doesn't do that thing. So,
Yeah.
but anyway,
John, could you put my because I don't think I can type in the comments or not. Can you put up my email address?
Sure.
dprailroad
Yeah,
at
let me get
Gmail.
back to comments real quick. Did you type it into our private chat? That would be the easiest way, if I can just copy and paste it out of there. Otherwise, I'll probably also be 100% sure you want to do this, because who knows who will watch this and how many people will watch it.
Well, okay. What happens is some people asked about the sign from Jim Vale. Somebody said,
I
"Oh,
saw
you ought
that
to make
earlier.
copies and sell them or something." I won't do that. But what I will do is, for many years, I had a photo of that sign on my railroad and was telling the daughter about it. And that's when she said I could have the real sign. So if you email me, I will email you back a photo of the sign,
There you
of the
go.
real sign. And you could do like I did. I framed it and put it on the railroad until I had the real one.
Yeah.
Another question that came up is, what software do I use for the timetable? It's Excel. And you need to go in there, if you haven't used Excel much, and look at the help file on using time, because there's a formula you have to do with this cell plus or minus this much time gives you what's going to go in the box. So if you're not familiar with Excel, it's a little bit of a learning curve.
Yeah. Sorry, by the way, I'm a little slow on the bringing up the comments, because we don't have our top secret producer today. She decided to stay inside and drink whatever coffee she drinks.
That's okay. And I got my dog barking at somebody right now. So hopefully, I don't know how loud that comes across to you.
Oh, yeah, we can hear the dog.
Let's see. What other comments did I miss? Okay. Well, Oakley's a pretty good dog, but he does like to talk when somebody comes to the door.
Yeah.
Let's see.
This is someone commenting about how they like hearing the couplers do that slack thing, and I think that's pretty cool. What's really cool is to hear that in real life, on a long train that has stopped for some reason, and they're getting ready to go. That is just the coolest thing to hear it. It's in stereo, right? Because the train starts way down there, and I'm assuming it stopped right in front of me when I'm out trackside, and it just does that long, you know, taking out the slack in the train. It's just a really cool sound, and it alerts you to when to start the camera, because you know they're going to go soon when you hear that.
Yep. You know, my previous life, I taught people hazardous materials response and used to be a responder. And we were working a leaky tank car in the yard, and I had the dispatcher on the phone with me to confirm the yard was shut down. And we're standing on a flat car looking at another train that's got this leak. And all of a sudden, I could hear the air flowing. And I said to the dispatcher, we need this shut down. Oh, it's shut down. I said, well, listen, you idiot. And then we got off and the train took off. So somehow the engineer did not know that his train was not supposed to move.
Yeah, that's not
But
good.
if I hadn't known that the airflow was telling me that train's about to go.
Yeah, so they were doing their brake test or whatever, huh?
They were airing up the train, releasing the brakes.
Yeah.
You know, another thing on sound is I love the sound of the metal wheels going across gaps in the rail.
Sure. Yeah.
You know,
diamonds are a great place
topics.
to hear that.
Say again?
Diamonds are a great place for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But people sometimes talk about, well, I want to use this for sub road bed because it's quieter. I don't know. Trains are noisy.
Yeah.
I use the sub road bed I do because I hand lay my track and Homa bed holds my spikes well. But that's the real reason I use Homa bed.
Yeah. I think that the noise muffling, though, in some cases is so that people in the other parts of the house aren't disturbed by it when you're
Yeah.
running your train, wherever it is. Although, to be honest, in the basement, I'm not sure, because most people outside of California, especially, have basements with their trains, and I don't see why they would care. Because
Yeah.
in most cases, I don't think sound from your basement is going to carry through the rest of your house too much. But
And that sound brings up a point on all of my locomotives. I think all of them now have sound. And I set the volume so really the only person really hearing the chug 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 of the steam engine is the person running that engine. I don't have
right,
them all so loud that you hear all the other trains. I
yeah,
do set the whistle a little bit louder because my railroad actually has the similar grade to the real grade on Cuesta, and any length at all of a train is going to require a helper, which in the days of steam, that's another train crew. So they use whistle signals
oh, so
to
you
talk
you
to each
do
other,
do you
to
simulate that on
speed
the
up or
railroad
slow
too?
down. Huh?
Do you simulate that, or do people just say, okay, speed up a little bit?
No, I ask them to please use the whistle signals,
Oh, that's
and
interesting.
they actually enjoy it.
Yeah,
It's another thing they probably hadn't done before, and they use the whistle signals to say if they're going or stopping.
sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting when you think about all the things that technology has changed over the years, because now we just MU stuff. They don't even need crews. They need two guys. And now they're
Yeah,
even trying, right? They're even trying to get it to where it's just one guy. And then who knows
yeah,
after that, they might just think that, that they can just remote operate everything from the dispatch office,
yeah,
which, I actually something like, I mean, we're really going to be off topic going down that rabbit hole, but it could work theoretically, but I think there's nothing better than having people on the train to make decisions.
yeah.
I
We're just
mean,
going to become no importance for us anymore.
yeah. Well,
No.
I guess if it were in the 50s, I suppose, I remember seeing basically, vintage films from the 50s where they're saying, hey, all this automation and robots and all this stuff is going to do all the work so people won't have to do that, so they can have more fulfilling and happy lives. But in reality, what it's done is caused people to have to do more because you're expected to be 100 times more productive than you were in the past. And if you don't, well, I'm not going to get into an economic discussion, but it's just funny how the expectations aren't exactly what ended up happening with automation, and all it did was take jobs away. You know what I'm saying? Just like on the railroads, it reduced the size of crews, right, with all this new technology, just to make more profit for the company and the shareholders. And that's not what we were promised. We were promised to have better lives because of all this technology and stuff.
Yep. Well, if you look back in the days I model, going back to that guy who was the boomer brakeman, uh, a block of reefers going up over Cuesta Grade back then would have 5 locomotives interspersed throughout the train, 5 either cab forwards or 210-2s, and each of those had a crew. And then about every 20 cars, they had a brakeman riding. So what was that? There was 5, 10, probably about 20 to 25 people on that train working to get it over Cuesta Grade at 10 or 15 miles an hour up
Yeah.
over that mountain. Now it's done by 2.
Yep.
And automation's great, but the period I model, they had 26 scheduled trains a day through San Luis Obispo. Now
It's
the
when
railroad has trouble if there's more than 3.
it's when the coastline was actually used.
Yeah,
Nowadays, you, at least because I live real close to the coastline up here in San Jose, and we get 2 trains. Well, if you count Caltrain, because Caltrain goes down to Gilroy, we get probably 6 or 8, maybe 8 trains a day going in either direction. mostly, either Amtrak, Coast Starlight, or Caltrain trains. There is a local that comes out of Watsonville, and we used to sometimes get like an auto, on off days, a one-off of auto racks being sent down the coastline, empty auto racks going somewhere, and that was it. And,
Yep.
I had been hearing that UP was going to end up having to use the coastline for some reason, but for more freight, but it seems to have not happened. This was like
No, they did away with the helpers, and they did away with the crew base in San Luis Obispo. So when there was a recent disruption in service someplace else, they were looking at what it would take to run the coastline, because they would have to deadhead crews from
Mhm.
Bakersfield over to San Luis Obispo to work helpers and so on, because there's no longer a crew base here. But yeah, we're off topic, but
Well, yeah, but someone said we're off topic, but it's still a topic.
yes, we're still talking trains, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it I don't know, for me, one of the most fun things from the hobby is sharing with other people
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
having
I
other
mean,
people share with me.
there are
You never
topics that
know you never know the impact that one person can have on another. Back in boy, it was probably the early 90s. I went to a PCR convention up in San Rafael. And as part of that convention, I got to go to this guy, Jim Providenza's layout. And I went to go over there on a tour and got handed a throttle. And I ran a train. And that's the first time I operated on a realistic operated layout other than just, watching trains run. And boy, that set the hook. If Jim hadn't trusted me, who knew not what he was doing, to run one of his trains and do a train job, I wouldn't be operating today.
yeah.
And went from that to I've been operating for, I don't know, is that 40 years ago now or 30 years ago? It's
Yeah.
now what I really enjoy. So you never know. You never know the impact you can have. Or there was this little kid that visited our module club one time, and I let him run my train, and a couple other people let him run his train. His name is Chris Palomares. I never pronounced his right name correctly.
That is how you
Chris,
pronounce it. Yeah.
until recently, was the guy that was making the decision what Athearn was going to produce.
Yeah.
And him and some other people took this early concept of Fremo and made it what's all across the country today.
Yep.
Would any of that have happened if we hadn't welcomed them that day to come run trains on our layout?
Yeah.
You just don't know.
Yeah. It's really interesting. You mentioned Jim Providenza and Chris Palomares, both of whom I'm very familiar with. I just recently, like within the past month and a half or so, was up at Jim's to do a layout tour finally, which is a really good layout tour. I still have to edit that one, but it's going to be a really good one. And then you mentioned Chris. Chris did the intro and part of the free HO scale Fremo layout tour that we did at the NMRA National Convention in 2019. And I just saw him in August he's in Colorado now. I don't know if you know that. I don't know if you keep up with him, but
Yeah.
he's in Colorado now, living close to Denver. And we hung out with him, and that's going to be on a Chasing Trains video where he's on.
Yeah, he's working for some other company now. I don't remember who.
I think he's doing mostly contract work.
Oh,
And
okay.
he's getting his own thing set up where they're going to be doing sales basically of model trains. So, and he would be a great person to know what to sell, because he was at Athearn for, I think, close to 10 years. Might have been more than
Yeah.
10 years. I don't remember exactly, but yeah, that's
I remember when he was a little wise ass kid with a ponytail.
oh, now he's a wise ass adult with a ponytail.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, we had a great time though, hanging out and doing stuff around. When I saw him, we met up in Greeley at the museum there, because I was doing some video of the Colorado Model Railroad Museum, which is another layout tour that's going to be out, I think, in December. I should mention that all the patrons on Patreon of this channel get to see all this stuff as soon as it's done being edited. So I think they've all seen the Colorado Model Railroad Museum, or they will sometime really soon, because I finished editing that one. And they've also seen all the Chasing Trains videos that have been finished editing that aren't going to be out in months. So this is just a self-serving plug here, Paul. Sorry if I'm having you sit there while I do it. So if you want to join the patrons on Patreon, I call it the TSG Train Crew. It's as cheap as like $2 a month, and all the people that are part of the train crew get to watch all these videos as soon as they're done, stuff that everybody else in the general public won't see for months because I run the channel on a schedule. So I don't know anybody's interested. I can put I think I have a banner that has here it is. Here you go. If anybody's interested in signing up over there, you can. It's cheap. I mean, and every bit helps. $2 a month doesn't sound like much. Really, it isn't. I mean, I think I can even afford to pay $2 a month for something, and I don't have a huge cash flow here. Believe me, that's why I have Patreon to begin with. But the important thing is that I enjoy what I'm doing. Right? I had a job. I'm just going to serve here for a second. I had a job in sales where I made a good amount of money, but I was miserable doing it. And after 10 years of that, I thought I'd rather not have a large cash flow and be happy than have large cash flow and be miserable. So I've been smiling a lot since 2015 when I quit that sales job. And Patreon, combined with the amount that YouTube generates, is starting to get to the point where it makes enough of a difference to make ends meet, I suppose. It's still not quite enough, but we're getting there. So that's going to be my own self-promotion. I'm terrible at self-promotion. I have this little ticker at the bottom as something that's pre-made so that I remember to put it on. And this is the first time we're seeing it an hour and 47 minutes into the show. That's how bad I am at self-promotion. So thanks for humoring me, Paul.
Sure.
All right, I'll make that go away. If anybody's interested, it's patreon.com/TSG Multimedia. Thank you. Okay, done with the self-promotion. But it's important, though, because, it adds up, and really it's the key to being able to do this. And, these shows like what we're doing right now wouldn't happen without help from people, and also without people helping with the content, Paul. Like, I'm really grateful that you wanted to share, and want to thank you for your time, because this wouldn't have happened without you either. So I think it's great. And I think that it's really cool to know as many people as I do now that are like you, willing to share your experience, your knowledge. There's a great saying that comes from I think it's from the LD-SIG. And we even talked about this when I was up shooting Jim Providenza's layout a few weeks ago, which is make only new mistakes.
Yes.
I don't know, right? I don't know if you've seen that. It's on the eraser. And I think that make only new mistakes is a great motto, because someone has done what you're trying to do. And if you can learn from them, you're going to get a lot more enjoyment out of the hobby. And that's part of what this is about here. What we're doing right now is about learning from the mistakes maybe that you've made, Paul. And so
yes,
I really appreciate it.
And another thing I like to tell people or suggest to people that I've been doing, as I mentioned, I'm upgrading, I'm getting rid of older, less prototypical rolling stock, and the way I'm doing that is there's a few companies out there that are making absolutely beautiful, correct rolling stock for my era. And I made a commitment to myself, when they come out with something new, they're going to come out with this XXX tank car, whatever, that's correct for my railroad, I will buy one. I'm not buying 20. I don't really need any more tank cars, but I'll buy one, because if not enough people buy it, they won't continue making them and they'll go away. There's another lesson I learned is when you see some little unknown business selling some really cool detail part, buy them.
Hmm.
What I have found over time is sometimes you get somebody who will decide, oh, I can make money selling these things and that I've been building from my layout. So they'll produce a couple hundred, and then they realize it's really not worth the amount of work for the money they're getting, and they
Hmm.
never make them again. So a
Yep.
habit I used to have to travel for my old job. I would always go to every hobby shop in every town I ever visited, and I'd ask them, "Hey, where's that box of dust-covered old detail parts that you got that nobody wants?" And I'd wind up buying half the box. And now that's a lot of the detail parts on my railroad.
There
That
you
they
go.
were made by somebody in their garage and never made again.
Yep.
So we got to support the manufacturers out there in any way you can afford to do it.
Yeah.
It's
Ag- Agreed. Agreed. One of the things that I've always found interesting is our I do the videos with Jack Burgess every other month, and this has to do with making sure you don't have a bunch of unrelated rolling stock, because people like to buy. If you see something you're like, oh, that's cool, I want that for my layout. Well, it could be something that is totally inappropriate for your layout. Now you could look at it and say, well, I really want it, so I'm going to put it on my layout anyway, and that's fine. People like to do that. But one of the cool things, which is a really simple concept, but in a way also kind of profound, is, and because I've asked Jack about this, like, why August of 1939? And part of the reason is it really helps you focus if you have a something as specific as that, because you can look at actual records and realize that tank car or that box car or whatever it is would not be on the railroad during that time. And so you don't buy a bunch of stuff and end up with models falling out of the bottom of your layout because you couldn't control yourself and you bought it anyway. Because if it doesn't belong in the layout, you don't get it, right? And I thought that was a really good way. I mean, nobody's going to be as much of a stickler, I think, as Jack. And I mean that in a really good way, because I think what he's done is just amazing. No one's going to be that strict, I don't think, or most people won't. But if you can use some level of discipline to make that sort of litmus test, would this have existed on my railroad? You're not going to end up with a bunch of crap that's, like I said, falling out from under the layout because you just can't help yourself. I think that's a really cool trick.
and then you can take that, and then Tony Thompson has written some articles on, and it's on his blog post of figuring out like the right mix. Because sometimes people think, well, I model the Southern Pacific, so I should only have Southern Pacific rolling stock. When depending on when you are is how free roaming all the stuff is.
Mm-hmm.
And so Tony had done a lot of research on, for example, the Pennsylvania. They had more of the whatever model boxcar than any other boxcar that existed. So you would expect to see a couple of them in San Luis Obispo or on the coastline.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, for me, when I decided, and actually it's November 14th, 1949, but I don't hold to that. It's just I was in a store in Sacramento years ago that sold old magazines, and I knew I was going to model 49, and I went up to the register, and somebody had picked up all the magazines for that date and then didn't buy them.
Hmm.
So I did. So I have Time and Look and Life and all these magazines from November 14 to 49.
Wow.
But for me, 1949, I picked it because I wanted to be able to run big SP steam and some early diesels. And the big SP steam ended their life on the coastline out of San Luis Obispo and up over Donner because they needed them for the mountains. So I can run cab forwards and 210-2s, and I can also run some little diesel switchers, and I can run a few mainline diesels. But I've had to flex my date for the purposes of operating. I have some SD7s on my railroad.
Hmm.
They didn't come out till I think 53 or 54.
Yeah, they were mid
And
50s, as I
yeah,
recall.
they're temporary because I'm having a hard time getting reliable running 282s and 280s, which is
Hmm,
what most of the coastline was switched with. Just got one back from a guy that redoes brass for me. And as I confirm it's going to work for me, I'll retire my two SD or Jeep 7s. But
sure.
they've been there because I need them if I want to operate.
Yeah.
Because
Again,
it's
you
hard.
make you make compromises, right? And it still makes sense. I mean,
Yeah,
and people do that. I mean, it's like, well, it's like a 5 year or a 10 year era, so that way I can
exactly.
run my early EMD stuff that I really like, or Alcos that I really like, but I can also run Steam as well. And
Yeah.
again, everything's a compromise. I think we're probably going to hear about compromises. I'm doing another show similar to this next month with Byron Henderson, who's the editor of the Layout Design Journal. I know Byron, but I'm just mentioning this for the people watching. That ought to be an interesting one too. And again, it's all about compromises. What's your layout going to be? Well, what are your givens and druthers? We'll be hearing about that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So,
And as people say, this is my railroad. As
yep,
Jim Vale said, this is my railroad.
yep,
If you don't like it, you did come in this door,
yeah,
and that door opens for you to leave.
yep. It opens both ways, doesn't it?
Yeah. And when somebody comes to my house, I really enjoy when somebody says something like, "Oh, is that the mill that's in San Miguel?" Well, isn't it bigger than that? And I like going, "Yep, you're right, it is." But I had to compress it to fit the railroad. But I
Uh-huh.
like that they said, "Oh, that looks kind of like the mill." So that means
Yeah.
I got it pretty close.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've
Or
I've
yeah,
mentioned
it
that.
just it makes it fun. It makes people say they like what you did because you got to be proud of your work.
Yeah. Do you know what it is? I think, Paul. I think it's a buy-in by the viewer. So, for example, real easy example. Have you been to Seth's layout? Seth Newman's layout?
Yes.
Okay,
Hmm.
so he has Niles Canyon on his layout, and his Niles Canyon actually is a very good Niles Canyon, because I say that because I saw it. I didn't even see it in person. I saw a picture of it that Jason Hill from Owl Mountain Models, also from the San Diego La Mesa Club, he posted a picture of something that he was working on. I think it was a SP passenger car or something on Farwell Bridge from Seth's layout. I saw this picture and didn't read the caption, and I said, "Oh, look, Farwell," because I've been in Niles Canyon a lot doing prototype videos. And when I saw it, when I did the layout tour of Seth's layout, I told Seth, I've stood right here and pointed to a place on his layout. I've stood right here and filmed the trains going over Farwell Bridge, and this is exactly what it looks like. And then there's another spot on the layout where the Western Pacific line, or what is currently the UP, that's what they use, goes over the old SP at a place, or near a place called Verona Road. And I've stood there and did an interview with someone. And I said, I've also stood right here. There's a buy-in when you have this personal connection that, to me, is just, it really makes me appreciate the layout personally more if I can see a place where I've stood and it looks like the place where I stood in real life. So that, I think, is what you're talking about when someone says, "Look, I recognize this."
Yeah.
So yeah, I get it.
I had a friend come over recently, um, just after we started allowing people back in the house from COVID. And during COVID, I built my version of the Stener Creek Bridge, which is a big steel viaduct outside of San Luis Obispo. And
Mhm.
he came and looked at it, and he goes, I didn't tell him what it was. I was just showing him around the railroad. He goes, "Oh man, you need a mountain bike under that bridge." I said, "Huh?" He goes, "I love riding my mountain bike under that bridge and up the road." I said, "Okay, well, here's where you can buy them from. Go find me a mountain bike and I'll put one on there for you.
Yeah, right. I'm
Even
guessing
though I know that bridge I modeled is about half of its real length, and it doesn't have the same handrails that the real bridge has. But to him, he knew that was the Standard Creek Bridge, and he knew it had been a place he had been.
yeah,
So I chalked it up in the wind column. You
there you
know?
go. This is another one. Brian from Fremont, from the TCSME. That's the Niles Depot. That's another place where I've seen scenes on the railroad that I recognize. They have a really good downtown Niles at that layout on the HO scale layout, and the N scale layout at the inside the depot itself has a great scene of Niles Canyon that is totally recognizable. The bridges aren't exact, but I know which one is Dresser Bridge and I know which one is Farwell Bridge, and I can point to a place and say I've stood here in real life. And it's only, the other cool thing about that layout is it's only a few miles away, so you can go look at it on the layout and then drive for 10 minutes and you'll be in that same spot in real life. It's really cool.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, we've been going for our allotted time.
Okay.
I don't see a lot of new questions coming in on the chat here, so maybe we should wrap things up. Is there anything else that you wanted to say or talk about before we do so?
Just my email address is up there. If
Right?
you have any questions or ideas, feel free to email me. I don't guarantee how quickly I'll answer you, but I will.
Couple years later, like,
well,
who's this guy?
And I do remember to check my spam folder because things sometimes disappear into there.
Oh, we know all about that, don't we?
Yes. I just I love model railroading. Very active in HO and also in 7.5 inch gauge. If you're ever going to be in the Paso Robles, California area, besides the fact that we got great wine to drink, come on by and visit the railroad. Love to share it. If you're going to be in the Bakersfield area in March, I'll be getting rid of a lot of stuff that already has the correct couplers and the little special washers under the trucks and all that. My excess stuff I'm going to sell at the train show in Bakersfield in March.
How long does it take you to get to Bakersfield from Paso Robles?
About 2 hours.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not bad. And I was going to take the stuff to the PCR convention, but due to COVID, a cruise we were going to take in January is now in April. So I'm going to be in Europe instead of at the PCR convention.
Oh, darn.
At my age, an opportunity to go to Europe, I'm not going to turn down.
Like I said, oh, darn.
Yeah, I think they have trains there too.
They do. Have you been anytime?
No, I've never been.
Oh, you've never been? Oh, yeah. When you see the trains they have in Europe, you're going to think, what are we doing here in US?
Yeah,
we are so far behind the times. It's not even funny.
But anyway, thanks everybody. And more important, anything else, have fun with your trains.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Paul, for your time. It's greatly appreciated. If you had fun, maybe we can do this again sometime. I think there was another clinic you did for the convention. We could play that one next time and have a discussion about whatever that was.
I've done enough clinics to get my author certificate for NMRA.
Yeah. Cool. Well, maybe we'll do that. I like to have a variety of people, so we probably won't do it next time I have one of these shows, but maybe one of the shows that we do next year sometime. You're welcome back anytime you want to come on or have something you think is important to talk about. So thank you,
Andy. No, unfortunately, this trip I'm not going to the UK. I had planned on going to the national convention there, but that got canceled. This trip is Spain and Morocco and Portugal.
Should be fun. I bet you're going to have a nice time. I hope you'll share some pictures from that, Paul.
Probably will.
Cool. All right. Well, I guess that'll do it for us today then. Thanks everybody for watching, and thanks to our moderators in the chat. I had a great time, and always the time flies by really fast. We have the podcast coming up next week on Saturday. And if you want to hang out for a second here, Paul, after the credits roll, we'll be off the air and we can chat for a second. All right.
Sure thing.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.